a farm and networking and kind of seeing the evolution of commercial ag and community, and seeing the value of resource management and application, and being able to drive all of those different components and topics is very close to my heart. And the cannabis community and industry has been a great platform for driving that forward, and I'm very appreciative and very grateful to be here and to be part of this.
Hi, I'm Jesse Dodd. I do a project called BioVortex, which has a lot of facets to it, but at its heart, it's a conceptual art piece to influence the cannabis industry towards a more environmentally friendly and future. And through teaching regenerative techniques, doing different events, talks like this, I created an award at the Emerald Cup called the Regenerative Cannabis Farm Award. And the concept behind that is to really showcase the farms that are doing the best for the earth and also growing amazing cannabis at the same time, that are really thinking about their soil, the biology, their ecosystems, their forest health, but also the relationship with their community, and this working in lots of different aspects, creating polyculture on their farm, doing the legal work, or maybe being inventive in your medicinal creations. I do a few other events too. The Cultivation Classic up in Portland, which is really based around science and ecology, really kind of dive into the chemotypes, the genotypes, working with Cascadia and Phylos to really explore the science and potential of medical cannabis, as well as the carbon footprint. With the Resource Innovation Institute, we created a kind of a survey to figure out the carbon footprint of these different farms too. So that was another way of actually awarding farms. And this year we are continuing the Regenerative Cannabis Farm Award that we do at the Emerald Cup there as well. But those some of the projects. The Living Soil Symposium I'm part of, that didn't happen this year, but this next weekend we're doing a thing called the Regenerative Cannabis, or the Science of Regenerative Organic Cannabis Conference up in Southern Humboldt. That will have a lot of amazing speakers, as well as the Dragonfly Earth Medicine Pure panel and a breeders panel that we'll be doing.
Cool.
I'm Phil Engford, and I'm a born and raised local community member here. I'm also part of Strong Growing with Angus and that amazing group that we have down there. And I'm also a member of the board of WAMS, and so we're always intrigued with cultivation practices and the legal issues around cannabis specifically, and how they apply to our community in a responsible way that can also help support people in need. So we're in an interesting time with our local ordinance process right now in the county, and we've been really engaged with that, and we'll be talking through all kinds of fun stuff around that. So that's kind of what I've been diving into and focused on a lot lately. As you all know, it's very shifty and something you have to be up to date with on a daily basis these days. So look forward to talking about it.
Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to start is kind of defining our terms. A lot of people in this field are excited about the idea of regenerative best practices and trying to find ways to implement those into a commercial era. And these are some of the role models that I look up to, and I'd like to hear in their own words what is regenerative for the audience, just to kind of get us on the same page. And it might be a little bit different, which is what we're looking to see, is how you guys see it.
When the concept of regenerative ag is used, it always brings to mind the natural ecological systems that we're in and the nutrient cycling that occurs. So in our ecological systems, we have a number of nutrient cycles, including our carbon cycle, our nitrogen cycle. There's even cycles for how potassium, phosphorus, which is a much slower cycle, but all of our macronutrients and all of our micronutrients are cycled from an environmental standpoint. Those are components of how we work as a biome. So these nutrient cycling processes are part of what holds our systems together, and it's a very important component to how our microbial systems and our macrobial systems work within that. And so regenerative ag, I feel like, is being defined from the standpoint of understanding how those nutrient cycling systems work. For me, and what the epitome of this is, and what I feel like should be also defined as organics, is looking at that from a localized component. So looking at localized resource management and actively developing those systems and protocols to reinforce the capacity for us to not only cycle our nutrients, but maintain a handle on the basic components that are building blocks to community, be it fuel, energy, food, and water. So all these components build towards this much bigger picture of a macro system that takes into consideration our microbe system or our micro system. So regenerative ag can be defined in many, many different forms and fashions, but if we were to really try to take broad strokes and look at the systems that we're in best case, it is resource management, waste diversion, utilization, and nutrient cycling, and that can be done in many, many, many different ways. I guess my exposure through my farm has been a very interesting experience. I was initially very much driven towards building soils. I tend to be a little bit of a compost fanatic. I love worms. I get lost in compost, talking about building compost and the microbial and biological processes that is the components to fully broken down organic matter, which in many forms and fashions are the building blocks to soil systems and again the epitome of nutrient cycling and resource management. My exposure now is taken and defined a few different twists and turns. I'm actually in production, our farm is in production of organic or bioponic production. Our blueberries are not in the soil, they're in containers. Our cannabis is grown not in soil, it's grown in containers. And the reason for that is because we can build the substrate or the media from localized waste diverted components. We can capture our water and nutrients and recycle it. We can build the biome of that container culture very efficiently and effectively. And this is valuable because those components can be built from diverted waste streams. We can build our fertility, we can build our substrate, we can even build our bioplastics from diverted waste streams without having to impact valuable soil resources. This gives us a chance to not only produce food from diverted waste and maintain a handle on our water use and how we're cultivating, but it makes it possible to be localized and also makes it possible for us to bioremediate impacted soil from ag lands throughout the entire world. So it's a really interesting adventure for me because I've been exposed now to so much in terms of appropriate technologies, ag sciences, and really looking at this from a biological perspective in terms of we're all part of this biome and nutrient cycling. So in short, I guess that to me is regenerative ag. I hope that
Thank you for asking this question, and thank you for that answer too.
We need a transcriber. Check the notes.
I got it.
You got it. It's all here.
Well, yeah, cycling at the heart of regenerative. As a definition, I guess the cycles of nature are kind of what we're looking at. Like nature doesn't have wastes; it has endless cycles of systems, and so nutrient cycling being at the heart of that, definitely the water cycle and keeping water quality and proper nutrient cycling and soil and thoughtfulness is a big part of that. I guess the definition for regenerative is, well, actually the definition of health is a system's ability to regenerate itself. So to me, like a regenerative anything is something that gives a greater health to the earth or the system through closed loop type practices of mimicking nature. Soil building is a big part of that, but I really like bringing up the actual accounting of impacts. If you're just talking about organic agriculture, like that doesn't necessarily mean even sustainable, let alone regenerative. That you could be taking mined materials from all over the world that they can be harmful in gathering those materials, harmful in the transportation. These are all impacts. So creating efficient systems, even if it's outside of our ideas, hydroponics, not always, but if the accounting, actually works out that your carbon footprint is less, that this is a better use of waste materials. So we need to be dynamic in how we look at that term because it's based off of your environment, your community, what's available, and being very thoughtful and innovative in the way that you use these waste products, and hopefully in any regenerative system that work goes away eventually.
I'm gonna take it a little more zoomed out. Appreciate the detail that Angus can provide and everything. And I'm also completely obsessed with microbes and compost and the organic application of these materials to a regenerative farming system. That's really where what I like to do is to play with that, almost like in my opinion, it's like a big kid's video game. It's like we are constantly playing with changing dynamics, and there's always problems and creative solutions to be had on the farm, and improvement always to be had. I think I used to have a company that produced compost and humified substances, and similar to what Angus is talking about, like worm castings and inoculum grade compost for being able to make compost teas and other ways to scale microbiology in a way that we can actually apply it onto a commercial ag scale and have it be effective. And where I kind of got held up with that is that spreading compost on hundreds of acres, which is what ag is on the scale of, is almost impossible, if not just a very daunting task. So it becomes a problem of a distribution chain and a supply chain of these materials that's actually efficient and in a deliverable context or method for the farmers to actually utilize and apply. And so that's kind of where what I like to say is regenerative agriculture is the application of local resources in a way that creates soil building on your farm. A lot of folks focus in on the sustainable agriculture concept, and if we keep sustaining what we're doing, we're going to just keep running downhill and running this place into the ground. And what we need to do is have methods of no-till farming and other biological and organic matter applications that can actually build soil and increase our bioactivity and nutrient availability in our soils, because we've not been managing them that way, and we've depleted them hugely. And I mean, some of the farms that we've worked with in the Central Valley and here in South County, Watsonville, some of the big strawberry growers, I mean, it literally is a whole field that is an inert hydroponic medium, because they've just fumigated it to oblivion, and there's nothing living in that soil. So we're playing with the technologies of just getting to the introductory point. What can we do on a very minimal basis that actually has an impact and a noticeable difference for farmers to just start getting that biology back out there, because you'll never be able to have an organic system be as effective as a chemical system unless you have the biology there to help cycle those nutrients, and you have to reestablish a healthy soil system before you can actually rely on it as a commercial farmer. So
Yeah, please. This is a conversation.
Well, at the heart of the word regenerative was coined by Bob Rodale. You might know the Rodale Guide to Composting. It's definitely kind of a Bible of composting. They've been doing books since the 40s, but I think a lot of people might know the one from the 70s. But a part of that definition is, one, the cycling of nature, but carbon sequestration, taking carbon from the air and putting it in the soil. And the more we're doing that, the more we're correcting the carbon that we're putting out. And a huge amount of our lands are used for agriculture, like just absolutely mind-boggling numbers when it comes to the square footage of our planet being used for agriculture. And most of that is actually very harmful and producing more carbon than not. But there are many systems where you can be pulling that carbon from the air and putting it in the soil through plants. I mean, photosynthesis is carbon sequestration. It's taking the energy from the sun, pulling carbon from the air, and eventually that biomass is going to be eaten by biology and be stored in the ground and continue cycling and producing things of that bring us wealth and health. So integrating plant systems, animal systems, and the community in closed loop cycles is at the heart of regenerative agriculture.
And I might have one other component in the big picture. We're talking about things here that have been evolving, but they've been evolving not only just because of our scruples, our ideals, knowing that it's the best not only for our environment, but for our communities, for our current moment, for the future as well. But it's also the economics of it. And as we drive this forward further and further, we're finding the economic validity in these concepts and seeing the long range and long-term implications of going, let's say directions of, intensive grazing with cover cropping to remediate ag lands that have conventionally be grown. We run conventional crops after even, and we are seeing increase in production because we're rebuilding those soils. I mean, if you really look at how agriculture has been evolving and our understanding of this biological system that we're in, or the biome that we rely on, it's really been rapidly evolving. Our understanding of the biological approach within itself has changed dramatically. And as we continue to evolve into that, and as we become more aware, as information becomes more accessible, and as we become more conscious and have options that are accessible for us to make these decisions, the economic validity stands behind that. And opportunities like this are pretty incredible, with the cannabis industry being the way that it has opened up and the way that it's evolved has presented an incredible platform for this. I've found that in this industry, the innovation, the willingness to be more conscious of how we're affecting the environment is much more prevalent than in a lot of the other commercial agricultural arenas that I've been in. And that's an important factor, because it means that people are becoming more conscious or aware and interested in all of those components. And though it is cannabis being the host crop that's generating that interest and the communication or conversations such as this, it's extremely valuable to see where those conversations go. For example, in cannabis now we're doing testing in parts per billion for residual fungicides and pesticides. We've never done that before. It's not going to be very soon until, from a consumer standpoint, I'm going to want to know from a parts per billion standpoint, what's on my food. And I mean, these are organics. We're not even talking about conventional nasty stuff. We're talking about plant-derived stuff or biological residuals, like spinosad or pyrethrum. These are components that are organic, and they are residuals from either a plant or a biological process. It's our understanding of these components, it goes so much above and beyond organic, because now we're starting to take into consideration residuals of any of those components, which is a great launch pad. It's an incredible opportunity to have a platform, to have these discussions, and to be able to exercise the concept of what is regenerative ag. Regenerative ag and commercial ag doesn't really exist. Only the economics of ag exist, and that's how farmers make their decisions. As we evolve into this, and the more that we're able to support in great detail and make more accessible regenerative agricultural technique and methodologies, and make them accessible to farmers, and as consumers, the more that we look for that, the more accessible it becomes. And that change is it's exponential. It's the more that you find the economic validity in something, the more that people make those decisions, it builds on itself so quickly. And it's incredible to see how that evolves. I mean, it wasn't until recently that we actually started to incorporate mycorrhizae into planting, or that we understood how biofungicides or biopesticides work. I mean, these are recent things, and these are components of our ecological system that have been here long before us. I mean, this is all part of it, but our understanding of our place in the biome has changed. So with the conceptual components of regenerative ag, the conceptual components of the cannabis industry, and the conversations that we're having towards localization and resource management, this is our platform, and it's an incredible opportunity. It's crazy to me that it's cannabis driven, because that crop has carried so much stigma. But in my limited experience and the exposure that I've had, it has opened up an arena of conversation throughout agriculture, which is a great way to start. I mean, why not? So, and these are all components that I think are building towards a much more sustainable ag community, and it's really fascinating to me to be here at this place in time when the stigma is being lifted. It's a historical point for a market economy to grow, and for us to understand how cannabis within itself is performing, and how we're able to utilize it, and understanding that plant all on its own is amazing. Because again, we take that information, now that we've provided that information to people regarding just cannabis, now I'm going to want to know about the rest of my food. I want to know about what other compounds are in other plants. It opens up the door for so much. It's really an exciting thing to be part of.
Here, I want to spark you guys, because I love
what you're saying too about you introduced mycorrhiza, you introduced some ideas about building biology and diversity, and as soil builders, I mean, I was speaking with Phil last night. Can we define soil and differentiate soil from substrate?
The truest definition of soil is fully broken down organic matter with sand, silt, and clay. It has some level of sand, some level of silt, and some level of clay. And mineral content and unbroken down organic matter, but in its truest definition, if we were in a soil science class right now, soils would be defined of having some percentage of sand, silt, and clay, and then organic matter is this little peripheral part. It's just like the bulker nobody really talks about in soil sciences, though it's the most important, because it's hosting all of the biological systems that are required to make everything else work. they're literally holding our systems together. But if we were looking for the true definition, that is soil. But I mean, there's a lot more holistic ways to define soil, I'm sure, and I'm sure everybody else has their.
Well, and speak from biovortex too, because your soil building is a piece of art, it's living art.
Absolutely. Yeah, the way we cultivate, the way we compost, the way we build soil, the way we do anything. I mean, looking at it as an art and putting that care and intention into it, and just understanding the systems and seeing what works with balance and what creates healthy biology. Yeah, absolutely. That would be the actual definition. But it's nice that we're using the term living soil a lot and not ignoring the main part of that is the microbiology element of that, the fungal and bacterial and protozoa relationships that are happening. Plants evolved from the moment they came out of the oceans. They started evolving with biology. Fungus is what has the enzymes to break down rock and to create it into a form that plants can actually uptake and use as nutrients, working synergistically with bacteria. All these different elements that were rocks that were locked up become biologically available. So the evolution of the plant was with a very diverse microbiology from the beginning, and our agriculture with the Green Revolution completely started ignoring that to be able to sell a bunch of chemical nutrients that were based off of petroleum products from excess of making bombs and implements of war. And then we took that war to our soil and started killing all the biology. And and it was out of this idea that it's better, you get more economic yields, and but on the other side of that is a big counterweight that is destroying our environment, and it is not it doesn't have a future. It is linear. It's resource extraction and to waste, and that is very finite. Regenerative and closed loop systems are infinite, and soil biology is just building up over millions of years. Look at a redwood forest; it's just constant mutualistic relationships, symbiotic but benefiting each other relationships with lots of different organisms that create this really diverse and robust biome where these, let's say a redwood forest, giant trees are able to grow. The understory is of plants that work mutualistically with those. So forests, building those soils, it takes all this time and it creates real health. And that's what we should be mimicking in our own agriculture. And you were mentioning the extreme standards that cannabis is held to. There's a lot of obstacles. The costs that we were just being brought up with the last panel, and then now the extreme testing with pesticides. These are huge obstacles for a lot of cannabis farmers. I mean, parts per billion. None of our food agriculture has to deal with these kinds of standards, but we're learning so much from them. Let's say myclobutanol, for example. It's a systemic fungicide that was used by a lot of farmers to prevent powdery mildew. There's a lot of systemic fungicides used in grapes and a lot of different agriculture to prevent different fungus and powdery mildew because it's an economic crop and you want it to maintain its integrity. But at the same time, you're poisoning this plant when you use these things. And it doesn't just go away, we're finding. This is very systemic, it passes on. And in cannabis, we clone a lot, and we actually are even finding that when you clone something that, when you're testing in parts per billion, and especially if you're making concentrates, this stuff's still there. So I really like, actually, that some of these negative things are now becoming amazing lessons, and I think the plant has been an awesome teacher for us humans to kind of figure out some of the stuff that nature's been trying to tell us again, as we got off our path. And then the costs of cannabis production, we in a black market with the high prices, we're able to have a very unbalanced system where we could just buy everything at a hydro store and be like, oh well, this works. It doesn't matter how much it costs because you're making so much a pound. Well, that changed drastically in the last few years, and now people have to be very efficient. And I think with that lower cost, and a truly regenerative cycle is actually going to almost zero cost. Some of these farms that are really doing full closed loop systems using their animals and their forest systems to build their soil and to build their microbiology and to build their nutrition from the things that were already around, from their forest debris, from the land management, from their animals' manure, and taking all these waste products and putting them in a looping soil building system. You're approaching zero, but your quality is also going up, and you also are going to have NDs, non-detects on all of your testing, and then you're actually going to have a product that can go to market. A lot of these people are going to spend a lot of money, and with the batch testing now, like if something's contaminated, that whole batch is like not available for the market anymore, and I think people are going to take that really seriously and improve their practices.
Yeah, all very good points. I want to piggyback on a couple of those. I think you guys covered the ABCs of soil there. The part of soil that interests me the most is the part that nobody ever talks about in schools or anything. It's not really being taught yet, is the microbiology and the organic matter and the true, what really makes up those components and what actually happens in the humidification process. And I guess part of my obsession with that is figuring out how we can apply that onto massive scale and actually get commercial agriculture to adopt these methods because of financial feasibility and because of all the cost of production that's being mentioned and ultimately the need for our soils to improve, because we're running them into the ground and people are really struggling to get them to produce, even with chemicals and pesticides and plant growth hormones and all kinds of fun stuff. So I guess for me, and you brought up using your animal and timber resources and a true regenerative system incorporates everything on a farm and in nature and in your community resource bank. And I got extremely obsessed with the idea of doing the rotational grazing and cropping scheme, which in my opinion, is one of the only ways you can truly achieve an actual regenerative system on a single farm without outsourcing some of your resource base, unless you have a massive farm with incredible natural resources. And that includes basically having strategic rotational grazing with forward cropping or pasture and soil building crops ahead of your animals, running animals through without over impacting your land and just causing a natural impact and fertilization through manure and urine, stirring that organic matter in, and then being able to treat that land just like you would a cropping plot, and being able to turn it in if you're doing till farming, or plant right into it, amend it if you will. And I had a farm for almost 7 years up in Sonoma County where we were doing this, and our pasture quality, our yield per crop, and our animal health was constantly going up in an almost exponential manner. The folks that are enjoying that land now are continuing that, and it's actually, it's come a real long way even since I left it about 5 years ago. I came back here. I was born and raised here, and my wife and I were both from here, so we wanted to move back and start a family, and we now have a 3-year-old and have an awesome farm opportunity. So really excited to be back in this community and digging into these issues with our local and kind of. I love our community and the farm aspect of our county and just the healthy balance that we have within that and our natural resources with our mountain areas. So I would love to see our community be protected and uphold its standards and its quality of life, and also to embrace this amazing agricultural movement that we have a chance to be a part of.
I want to talk about small farms. I'm going to give this wireless mic to you guys. So now you're no longer tethered. But with cannabis at this moment in time, we're limited on our canopy size, which is pretty much unlike any other agriculture, right? When we think about yields and farming, we think about acres, whether it be food or grapes. And with cannabis, we're limited to not acres but square feet. But with that, you can also implement some small farm best practices, and how can small farms improve biology and regenerate and remediate swaths of land, like what Phil was sharing about that farm in Sonoma. And from your efforts now, the current owners are reaping those benefits and continuing that practice, but just the importance of small farms and spreading this knowledge to diversify and have more small farms in the big picture.
Well, I guess
Is it working?
there it goes.
There it is.
I want to bring up one quick little point, and that is, we're working in a biological system, and every system that we're farming or in production, whether it's a small scale, garden for our home or a commercial farm, the growing environment, the cultural growing environment has a tremendous number of variables. So the truth be told, the best way to build your biological system is it depends. It depends on the circumstances in which you're in and all of those variables. There's definitely rules of thumb in building compost, cover cropping, or if you're in a larger arena and you have the capacity to intensively graze and develop programs like that's all great. But there's not one go-to solution. There's not one go-to cure. It would be amazing if it was. The truth be told, biological systems take time. Humans are important components of the biome in terms of being stewards, but we also generate disruption, and disruption is important as well because disruption generates biological response and action. It's just a matter of maintaining that balance and disruption. And quite frankly, our population has grown so much, and the way that we've been stewards up until this, all the way to this point, has been hit and miss in terms of understanding our place in this biome. You go into a jungle or into the redwood forest, and it has these incredibly rich systems, very, very biologically diverse. And from a chemical standpoint, you test the fertility in that soil, and there's no nutrients. It's all bound up in all of the biomass that's there, all the microbes, all of the macrobes, everything else is consumed, all the nutrient. And you have this incredible rapid nutrient cycling, and it's completely dependent on that disruption to have that nutrient cycling because everything's just predator and prey, which from my perspective is kind of defining life. We're all just immobilizing and cycling nutrients. We're all just kind of predator and prey from a microbial to a macrobial level. But applying those concepts to in any environment, you have to be able to see those sort of broad, big picture components to develop your protocols, your methodologies, your strategies for building that biological diversity. And there's a number of incredible ways to do it. But unfortunately, there's not just one way because it's biological diversity. There's a million ways that we've got to do it. And that's our best way and our best options with the resources that we have at hand.
That's some interesting stuff. Having all those nutrients bound up, that's really important for water quality too. That means it's not like leaching in and it's immediately put to that next energy cycle, to that next bit of life. And thinking big picture with some of these things, like in the forest, one of the biggest nitrogen cyclers is actually like fungus gnats, eating fungus and being eaten by other things. And we think of fungus gnat as a negative thing in cannabis in general. So I like, kind of getting big picture and looking at the larger scheme of nature. Talking about rotational grazing and thinking about the buffalo going through our country. That was a big part of the health of I think the Americas. The North America was the 7 million buffalo going across the plains and eating grass, and so this grass it's pulling carbon from the air. It's getting energy from the sun. And then those roots are growing in the soil. Those roots are forming microbial relationships with fungi and bacteria, protozoa, and a few other things. And they're all working synergistically with that root system. It's called the rhizosphere, where they're interacting with what's in that soil, and they're able to break down some of the mineral that's there and uptake it through that relationship, through that biology. It's kind of like our gut too. Like that's how we're able to derive the nutrients from the food that we're eating, is through the microbiology in our gut system. That larger concept of cycling and paying attention to those forest systems, how they are moving this material, the trees dropping their leaves, it being mulched back into the ground. So as like animals are coming through and grazing, they eat that grass, and those root systems that were built up in the soil then start to slough off their root tips, and a lot of the that matter that was living now becomes a organic matter for the biology to eat, and all of that carbon becomes sequestered now in the soil. So like animals just walking through at the right time and eating grass, if it's overgrazed, then that is high impact. but we had predators moving them along, so that moving the animals at the right time to eat that grass and for those roots to slough off, you're sequestering carbon without bringing a bunch of compost on. So just mimicking those systems where you're doing the least amount of work to gain the most benefit, to build better soil biology, to sequester carbon. It's looking to nature is really the way to do it.
I guess the thing that excites me the most and that I enjoy applying on a small scale for myself personally and in my backyard is just the concept of applying and getting a better establishment of beneficial microbiology in my own gut biome and my soil on the plant surfaces in my backyard. The thing that's kind of it's really easy to overcomplicate nutrients and soil and what plants need and all this stuff. And if you can just hone in on microbiology, the few classes of them, and a basic fungal to bacteria ratio, getting protozoa in there to cycle those decomposers and provide nutrients and pathogen reduction for the plants and for yourself and for your skin and for everything around you. It's just a more is merrier kind of a thing, and it's very liberating in a sense of like you almost don't have to overthink about, okay, am I giving it the right amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and did I kill all the bugs, and did I it's like we're creating a natural probiotic system for the plant, and it's healthy enough that we don't have to get extreme with our corrective measures, and stuff just starts feeling good. So.
One more quick thing to
Talk
add.
about the biome. Let's hear it.
I have one more quick thing to add. There are some tremendous resources that can simplify this conversation because we all took broad strokes to help define kind of that vision. But there are some very, very good resources that are localized and accessible. Up at UCSC, there's the Chadwick Garden. It's a garden that is very much driven from this concept of resource management and how to build your soils and cover crop and cycle. It's driven from a biodynamic or a biointensive methodology. And there's a book called How to Grow More by John Jevons, which is a really great introduction to just backyard growing and farming, incorporating biological diversity, cover cropping, host crops, and building your soil. And it's just very, very well composed. It's appropriate for this sort of area as well. There's also a biointensive farm, a John Jevons farm up in Northern California as well. So if you are looking for solutions and information in those sort of arenas, that's a very easy and accessible resource. How to Grow More by John Jevons is actually how to grow more fruit, nuts, and vegetables than you ever could imagine on less land and blah, 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 blah. But it's a great book.
Cover cropping and polyculture, I think these are things that we need to be integrating in cannabis as much as possible, and there are definitely some amazing farms showing this example. It's part of why we do the Regenerative Cannabis Farm Award, is to just showcase these farms so people can learn about these practices and also know what they want to support when they're in a dispensary on a consumer level. Like, what do I want to put in my own body? Like, who do I want to support because of their relationship with the planet? And cover cropping is a big way to be able to pull that carbon from the air, put it in the soil, build your biodiversity, and right in the soil, right where you are, because you just grow it there. The roots grow. Legumes and stuff that have nitrogen fixing relationships with bacteria like rhizobium in their roots are pulling that nitrogen from the air as well as the carbon, and then they're storing that, and then that is eaten by biology and it stays in the soil. So when you're putting that out in between your cannabis crops, or right after harvest, or in the off seasons, you are working to build more soil without really doing anything. Nature, you just put out the seeds and nature starts doing it, and then you mulch that back in, and all that material is there. Polyculture, I think, is really important. Just thinking about your companion plants and what you're attracting, having real diversity and balance, I think, is at the heart of a healthy system. And I find that, even thinking about pesticides, let alone organic pesticides, starts to go away when you have a truly diverse system where, let's say you have a decent amount of yarrow growing, and it's attracting, let's say, a miniature wasp or different predators of something that could have been a pest. But how we even think of a pest might be really short-sighted because everything's doing something. We're just very short-term thought-based instead of thinking about the bigger picture. But when there's that balance there, then the things don't get out of hand. You don't have, spider mites just going out of control because you have other things there that are they're eating them and keeping them in balance. And I think at the heart of regenerative agriculture is balance and diversity.
Yeah, one other little tool that we're playing around with on our farm right now is the introduction of beneficial insects, which is kind of just another preventative, forward-thinking step, I guess, kind of progressive pest control. And you can introduce predatory wasps, other types of mites that are bigger than the spider mite or russet mite, other mites that specifically target cannabis and other crops. And it's something that we're finding is scalable. It's viable on a commercial level, and people have been introducing ladybugs and praying mantis and similar predatory insects forever. But the biological agriculture community is kind of building more resources around this, and there's more focused producers in this, and we're fortunate enough to have a landlord that was in the flower industry ahead of us that was so forward thinking that 20 years ago they had a house where they grew persimilis mites that specifically predate on the spider mite, and it's pretty incredible to have that resource on our farm. Definitely, there's enough resources online or locally. I know a lot of the nurseries carry insects that you can incorporate into your backyard very easily.
Also, our forest systems are incredible resources for insects that could be beneficial. Just having healthy forest systems around us. In Humboldt, we're definitely a lot of forest, a lot of mountain area, and so really regenerative agriculture has a lot to do with the land management, and hopefully, like if you're managing your land really appropriately, the production of your agricultural goods are just a byproduct of that.
And then, of course, lastly, we understand how insects are working better than we have, and how the microbes are working better than we have. So it's not that we just need to go and release predatory insects all the time, just everywhere. It's that we can strategically use them and, approach this with strategy and some level of knowledge base in terms of how our systems are working. And this is kind of what I was referring to earlier. It's our ag systems have changed, and they continue to change. And it's incredible. I mean, from some standpoints, it's hard to be patient to see the change, and it's definitely a scary world in a lot of different ways, and agricultural being the center part of food systems and community and everything else. It is definitely probably the most important thing that we can look at and discuss. But there are a lot of people involved with growing into the ecological system that we're part of, and it's an exciting thing to me because in a lot of ways I came at this. I studied plant physiology and biochemistry, and I was an agroecology major. I really I wanted to see how we can make these things accessible, how we can make this information accessible. If nothing else, I do passionately believe that as people we all are drawn towards making good decisions, and the more that we can make those good decisions accessible and economically viable, the more that they are definitely utilized. And that being said, from the standpoint of building our home gardens, building our environmental systems, being good stewards of our forest systems, being good stewards of our ag land, and being knowledgeable about all of these different components, it's something that we get to build on and compile and share and grow out in all these different directions, because it's not that there's one solution to any of this. There's not. It takes all of us to think about it, all of us to study it, all of us to understand and work together, because every ecological system is different. There's a million variables. It's kind of the magic of it. It's the perfect imperfection. There's never going to be anything that's exactly the same. Everything's a snowflake, and each snowflake has a little bacterial mass in the center that made it this unique pattern. How incredible is that? It's something that we're becoming more and more conscious of in our systems, and the more that we understand that, and the more that we embrace understanding that, the more that we can play a better role, and the healthier we are as a whole, be it physically, be it from a community standpoint, even emotionally, even from an intellect, the capacity to potentially evolve beyond the way that we're currently living as a society of people. We have the chance to exercise our creative and logical ability and understanding of the systems that we're in, and it expands into so many different arenas. It's quite a thing. I mean, the topics that we're covering right now are huge. I mean, there's so many different components to each one of these things that we're just glancing over. But it is the future. I mean, and we understand these better than we ever have. how cool is it that we get to sit in the middle of downtown Santa Cruz, talk about cannabis and the environment and sustainability? It's an incredible opportunity for all of us, and a big chance in terms of an industry change for us to drive that. And Santa Cruz being a community that has been accepting of not only these components but also the cannabis industry and all of those other factors makes this a center point for this to happen, makes this a center point for this platform to grow and for this information to evolve and become more accessible and to actually generate social change within our lifetimes. How freaking amazing is it that we could be part of that? Like, sitting right in the middle of it and just like cracking up. It's just an amazing experience to be part of and to see such a tremendous change at such a timely point in terms of population growth, in terms of society, in terms of the world that we're in.
But another realms too on that. That was beautiful. Thank you. Actually, economics and marketing, I think, have been some of the most damaging things to our planet in the last, several decades. However, right now, I think, all the things that you're just talking about, these are the things that can make these farms special. A cannabis farm, your flowers are special because of the artistry you put into the land care that you put into this, the uniqueness of your microbiology. These are it's just good things that you should be doing, but these are also marketing tools that bring education, that let people know like what they want to be putting in their bodies, and that becomes pervasive in other aspects. Like, we want to now know, like, wait, if this is testing in small amounts of cannabis, what are we putting in our food? Because it's a lot more, I'll tell you that, that we're poisoning ourselves with our food systems, and now we're becoming more aware of that. But I would just like to, encourage all of the farms that are doing the right practices to market it in a real way. But we also need to be very wary of greenwashing. This is definitely going to be happening as, each term that we have, organic now doesn't mean that much. Cage-free never really did. Like these, it was impulse to get a consumer to buy something thinking that they're doing good, but then taking away the actual meaning from it. So the more we educate ourselves and the more we're true and honest about how we represent ourselves, that I think we can take marketing in a different direction. It doesn't have to be the enemy of the planet that it has been. It can be something new. It can be an art project that we put our hearts into that actually can heal the planet.
Same.
I guess, yeah, my closing thought would just be, if any of this stuff interests you, I'd encourage you to get involved with our community, because like you're saying, this is the tip of the iceberg. The opportunities are massive. There's a heated discussion on the county level right now about how it wants to approach agriculture in our community and food systems built into our community and how they relate or how they stay separate. I think there's many hot topics. We have some big meetings, County Board of Supervisors and the Planning Department in the next coming weeks, and it's all being defined. So come on out and play.
With that said, I want to give the audience an opportunity to engage with our experts here. This is a special opportunity to have these brain trusts in person. So if there's any questions or inquiries, we can pass the mic.
Just had one question. One of the big issues in our state, the world, is water. And none of you have touched on how the sustainability systems of water is affecting your ability to grow this industry.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
So actually, that is a cornerstone of our farm and our production. I did mention it at the very beginning. Our methodology in growing is called Substrate, and I didn't actually define Substrate earlier when you asked. Substrate is a growing media that actually has no sand, silt, or clay in its truest definition. So we're actually growing out of material from coconut trees, coconut fiber, and cocoa husk. So the methodology that we're growing in containers means that we're running water through a soilless media, right? And it's just going through the container with nutrients, organic nutrients, and all of this biological activity is happening in that container. Well, each one of these containers is sitting on a gutter. It's this plastic gutter. Ugh, plastics. Whole other thing. Sits on a plastic gutter. The water runs to a drain. The drain goes to a basin. The basin gets treated and then recirculated. The amazing part of this is, yes, it's reducing our water use by 30 to 40% on a crop as a whole. And if you look at substrate growing in the berry industry in California, this is a massive component to people pulling their plants out of the ground and going into container culture. Also, we can't use soil fumigants commercially anymore, which is a big determining factor in why berry growers are growing to the substrate methodology. But bottom line is bottom line, and they're seeing a reduction in their fertilizer and water use by 30 to 40% at a minimum. Also increase in production and yield. So we're able to capture our water and recirculate it. The other value of this is, even though we're treating that water from an organic standpoint, an organic system, we oxidize that in water treatment to recirculate, to kill off, the massive amounts of bacteria that are blooming in all of that water you can imagine. But the organisms that are able to sustain themselves through that oxidation process are the symbiotic microbes, not the saprophytic, not the organisms that are our compost builders, but the organisms that live specifically off of the roots of those particular plants that are in that environment. So we have localized nutrient cycling, and we're constantly reestablishing that biological system from those particular microbes that have naturalized to growing in that culture, in that system. Very incredible. And it's a beautiful part of ag as we look at waste diversion and utilization, which I talked about in the very beginning, because we can actually, it is possible, and we are moving towards bioplastics to go on site. So we can formulate our bioplastics from microalgae-based polymers and carbon-based modulants, put them into a 3D printer, and we can actually produce that on site, which is an incredible component. So we start to expand upon this, and we can take, and divert carbon-based waste streams, go through a thermal process, expand it with an organic polymer, and make our substrates. So again, this is all waste streams that we can divert utilizing appropriate technologies and incorporate into our food systems. We can literally grow our food on asphalt, organically, high quality, and rebuild our soils. We can intensive graze our massive ag lands that have been impacted and generate huge amounts of food, and do it environmentally and effectively to rebuild our systems as a whole. In fact, from the Allen Savory Institute, they've seen change in weather patterns. Again, water related. In South Africa, they're able to rebuild soils to the extent where they had better water holding capacity in those soils, so transevaporation rates. It literally changed the weather pattern. How incredible. Went from turning a desert into a prairie.
Wow.
And this is, these are methodologies that are accessible. There's a ton of efficacy behind it. It's just now we're evolving into how to make appropriate technologies to make this possible, how to turn intensive grazing into something that can be effective and utilized by a wide range of people, and how we can track animals and understand, all the way down to how we grow our crops and how we incorporate methodologies for building biological activity in our backyards. This is all water holding. Microbes are first in line to hold our systems. The last thing that I wanted to point out is I was kind of being a jerk when I defined soils, because that's what it was always stuffed down my throat. It's sand, salt, and clay and organic matter. The truth is, the majority of the biomass in our soils is microbes. Microalgae, bacteria, fungal organisms, and then a whole wide range of protozoa, amoeba, flagellates, little nematodes, all these amazing little guys. But the truth be told, that our biological systems, our soils are built of microbes. We're standing on microbes. When you walk outside, even with the asphalt, underneath that asphalt, even on that asphalt, we're covered in them. These guys are amazing. They are holding our world together. They're filtering our water. They're building our soils. They're breaking down our waste. These are the cornerstone of who we are. We're consuming them. We are built of them. We are covered in them. We are microbes. We are part of this system. We are part of that biological system that we are born into, and it's just this incredible factor. So when we talk about water, and when we talk about farming and ag and cannabis and cultivation, there are many methodologies for building soils, for water holding capacity, to make sure that we're taking that into consideration. The other really interesting component is being able to take automation with organics allows you to pull metrics. Metrics are important. The more that you have hard information, hard data, the more that you can apply that to a larger arena and get more efficacy out of it and apply it. So for our production, we have metrics on how much water we use. I can account for every drop of water and every ounce of fertilizer that goes into every crop, every plant, because we're maintaining measurements on our EC, our pH, the water tension in the substrate. We're able to maintain information on transevaporation rates from solar radiation. This is all accessible stuff. It's commercial fertilizer equipment that has been set in place so that we're utilizing our inputs economically and efficiently. Well, from the standpoint of organics, to automate that and utilize that, it's incredible. The ability to pull those metrics and have that information, that hard detail, it supports all of this exponentially faster than we would have otherwise. And it's an incredible platform in terms of driving that forward just in water management alone. That's a great topic.
You don't care about water.
Oh.
Thank you for bringing water up.
I need to dip out here.
Amen. Oh, yes, thank you, Phil.
Thank you all so much.
And we have our next panelist, so we're going to wrap it up. But thank you, Phil. Thank you so much for coming, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you all.
A couple last things about water.
Yes, please.
So
Please,
thank you for
Jesse.
bringing that up. Water quality, I think, is at the heart of regenerative agriculture. It's very important. We brought it up very briefly at first, but so I come from Humboldt County, and obviously the salmon are the heart of our area, and so water quality for salmon's a really big deal. A lot of these cannabis farms that were not thinking about the environment as much, doing some straight clearing and grading is very detrimental to the water quality, and then the usage of sucking out of these tributaries was all bad. Maybe not nearly as bad as the logging that happened before. When we saw the logging, we saw a complete destruction of that soil quality that had taken all of these thousands or millions of years to build up, and all of a sudden, like when we got the big floods, like you see all of this sediment go down, creating massive erosion, doing lots of damage to our property, as well as harming the salmon. So really thinking about using the least amount of water, and that is, there's lots of different systems, but the more we build organic material in our soil, the more we sequester carbon and promote life, the less water that we actually have to use, the more we're mulching on top, having not exposed soil, and then also building regions of biology, riparian buffers between our cultivation areas and the water, but not even using anything in the first place that could harm water quality, any pesticides or nitrates or phosphates we don't need those anymore with these systems, because the microbiology is what allows that to happen. So yeah, thinking about water quality, the salmon, the forest systems, and we know that forests regulate weather systems in the redwoods for sure. That's really, we see that every day. It's very, very clear. They also, the salmon going into the ocean and bringing that nutrients from the ocean and bringing it back into the forest systems year after year. These redwoods are controlling a lot of larger systems that go into the rest of the world, the weather systems and the oceans, and bringing that back. So the more that we really take care of the salmon in our forest systems, the better our water will be.
Well, give thanks. I think that's where we got to leave it. We have another panelist, and can we take a quick family photo before you guys bounce?
Yeah, let's do it.
So thank you, everyone. Give it up for our panel.
So we'll take a quick 5-minute
break, and so if you need to get up and stretch, we'll give it 5 minutes. And
here's Angus.
Also, if you guys want my contact information, I did bring a little handful of cards.
Great.
You guys are all welcome to come visit us at the farm, and I also can provide commercial ag resources if anyone's in that arena and interested.
Some online resources that we created. There's a website called Regenerative Cannabis Farming, where we put a lot of this information and links to fun stuff, maybe even interviews like this, as well as videos.
I'll share this.
And then BioVortex and Regenerative Cannabis Farming Instagrams.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Take a quick break, and we'll be right back with the breeders panel. Seeds for the people. Take a quick photo.
Sorry.
Get it in there.
Okay.
Got it. Thanks, Jack.
Got something for you to choose from.
There you go. I appreciate that. Cool. So just a few minutes, and we'll jump right in.
Does that still work? Good friends with
Yes.
John Jevons, actually.
Really? Oh man, that's such good stuff.
That's the point.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for all coming. My name is Kokoro.
Oh, yeah.
And this is our lounge. So everyone is welcome to stay. There's an area back out there in the back. If you want to get some fresh air out in the back, you can do that out there as well. And thanks for coming to the lounge.
A lot of the cultivated rainwater attachment and also groundwater recharge techniques. Utilizing what's falling in from land gathering.
Thanks for hosting, everybody.
Hey, what's happening? Flowing right along. Nice turnout. That's nice. Put on some tunes. Hey, John. Oh, I really appreciate it, man. Yeah, I want to connect with you guys.
I really want to do the seed.
Oh, dude, no worries. I'm so stoked you made it. Yeah, I'll stream it. I'll stream it. Yeah, it's on Facebook. It's right in line with what we're talking about. Yeah. Oh, they're warm. That's right.
We should talk, but yeah, I'm gonna come back.
Cool.
And then what's the one after?
It's for wellness. They're about an hour long. Yeah, and there's a wellness panel, which is about non-intoxicating cannabis. So juice, the sublingual, capsule, different ratios, and then after that is, I think there's a green trade.
Oh, cool.
So there'll be Pat, Trevor's a lawyer, and then Valerie Corral.
Very cool, man.
Yeah, solid lineup, bro. Solid lineup.
Solid.
It all came together.
No, it's
This is the It's just
Dude, I'm just
so
like so
grassroots
charged
right now.
and this year there
so
wasn't even
stoked to
one
support. Like
incident.
I'm actually
As far as I met with
Good. He's coming at two.
with as much
Yeah.
cannabis innovation
together.
That's
but
excellent.
the last couple of years,
That's so cool. Yeah. He had a bare bones thing up, but everything can be improved, you know. Cool. I'm gonna wrap this baby up.
in like a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
It's not like an ego thing. It's like healing the planet and having all that attention at that moment.